Hello and welcome. My name is Matthew Marquit, and in this particular video, I want to cover creating terrain in 3D Studio Max using height maps. So let's talk about their connection and how all of this stuff works. So the first thing I want to do is bring up my notes here, and you can kind of see right here a height map, or in some cases is called a displacement or a parallax map. As we can kind of see up here, it's basically a black and white image that represents height data. So if we kind of take a look here, this is your albedo texture or your diffuse. So this is the color, and then this is the height map where areas that are in white are higher than areas that are in black. So the purest of whites is the highest point. If we actually scroll down a little bit here and we take a look at this picture, you kind of see this from a top view of, say, a height map, and then the side view of what it would look like. And you kind of see with the pure whites, we go all the way up here, the pure blacks, we go all the way down, and then we get this little gradient, this little shade of gray that creates the slope. Now, if you want a perfectly hard, like straight 90-degree slope, you would literally go from perfectly white with a hard edge to perfectly black. If you wanted to slope it kind of a little bit less, right, and so on, then you're going to do these gradients of gray, and that's kind of really how it works. So if we take a look here in this image, and this image is from Unity's official documentation, you can kind of see here with the three images. The first image here is just the albedo texture on a wall. The second image here is using a normal map, so you can kind of see it's beginning to pop up a little bit, but it's not quite off the surface. I know you can't tell because the image is so small, but this is a perfectly flat edge over here. And then on this one with the height map, it really looks like it's popping because it actually is. There is geometry being created that pops out the rocks a little bit. So that's the idea behind what is known as a height map. So what are some of the ways that we can create height maps? So if you take a look at my notes here, I've actually got three ways that I want to talk about. The first one is using real world locations. The second one is painting your own height map in a program like Photoshop. And then the third one is creating height maps directly from 3D Studio Max, where I have some more notes down there. So let's take a look first at this site here called Terrain Party. So I'm going to click on this. So you're basically going to go to terrain.party. Okay, so let's bring this puppy over here on the side. And we'll drag this out a little bit so you can see it better. Of course, give it a little bit of time to load up. But at first, you're going to get this kind of a little view of Europe. We can zoom out a little bit here. And like I said, once again, let it kind of load up here. But the idea is you can actually select a little area on the map that you want to pull a height map directly from. So we can get a nice black and white image of the height that is created from the terrain in real world locations. Now, my suggestion, because the search tool in Terrain Party is pretty much useless, you need to go to, say, Google Earth. Take a look at Google Earth and go into the 3D mode. So if we kind of come in here, and if I minimize this again and actually click on Google Earth, you can kind of see we can load up Google Earth here, load up in Chrome, and so on. And once you're in Google Earth, what you want to do is you want to take a look at the 3D mode. So we can kind of like zoom in on an area, right? Anywhere in the world, it really doesn't matter, and click on the 3D and zoom up real close, and this should give you a better impression of what the terrain looks like. And of course, the more you zoom in, the more you can kind of get a good idea. So if you like what the terrain is doing, the mountains, the valleys, the rivers, things like that, just kind of find where that location is on the map, kind of zooming out, and then try to find that same location, of course, in Terrain Party. Okay, and it's not easy to do, like I said, because the tools aren't that great as far as search goes, but you should be fine figuring this stuff out. And what you want to do to get a height map from Terrain Party, and I'm actually going to go to the United States here and click on where I live. So we're going to zoom up here into the Phoenix, Arizona area, and I'm going to use the South Mountain area of Phoenix, which is this right here, as an example. Now, what you want to do first in order to get your height map working is you want to come over here and you want to click this button that looks like this little export button. So we're going to click on this, and then I'm just going to hit OK. And what that basically does is it's going to center. I'm going to cancel the naming, but it's going to center this tool that allows me to choose where I want. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change the kilometer distance here. This box represents 18 kilometers at the moment in both directions. If I hit plus, I can go up to 20. Right, so we get up 20 kilometers, we get all of South Mountain kind of within this area. Now, it goes as low as 8 kilometers and as high as 60. So if you want to up and down that, you can figure it out that way. But this way, we can kind of take a look at this area. And now, if I click the export button again, and then I can name it, it really doesn't matter. I'm just going to click a bunch of nonsense and hit OK. And what it's going to do is it's going to download a zip file with a bunch of different images that allow us to create different versions of height maps based on different data that exists. Now, if you use the United States, there actually is more data in the United States than anywhere else in the world. So, but the thing is, you'll still get a height map no matter where you're choosing. So let me just click down here on the zip file. And this puppy will load up, and there's going to be a bunch of different images. These are all these different places that collect height information, right? And they kind of merge them together in this one image called merged. This one I tend to find is the best. You can kind of see it right here. So I'm going to grab this. I'm going to drag this onto my desktop, and I'm going to go use that later. So I drag that off onto my desktop, and now I can shut this off. You guys can delete the rest of it, because like I said, all we're going to use is the merged one. So we're going to shut that off right there. And now I can basically minimize this. And now we can go into a program like Max and kind of get started. I'm going to go back and talk about how to do it within Photoshop and within Max itself in a second. So let's load up Max here. And so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to create a plane. So we're going to start off by creating a plane here. It really doesn't matter how big you make it immediately, because we're going to zoom out and make this larger. And we want to make sure that our units are set up to meters, because we're going to use the same set of meters that we found in the terrain party. So remember, we did 20 kilometers. So 20 kilometers is 20,000 meters. Now I'm not going to make it 20,000 meters in here. That'd be a little silly. But we're going to go to customize, and I'm going to go to unit setup, and we're going to make sure that it's meters. So if you don't have it, do that. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set it to 20 meters, because the tools working in, if we're trying to keep it one-to-one real-world settings, the tools working in Max are going to be really tiny and almost useless if you go on the scale of actually doing 20 kilometers. So we're just going to leave this, and actually I'm opening this up too soon. That is the material editor. But you can see right here, right, we've got our terrain going to start on a plane. So we're going to set it to length and width, 20 meters, and 4 segments in both directions. Okay, so what we want to do from here is we're going to add a couple of modifiers. So I'm going to go over to my modifier tab, and I'm going to add a modifier in this case called Turbo Smooth. So we're going to come down here, and we're going to add Turbo Smooth. So that basically adds more geometry to your mesh. We're going to set our iterations to 7. The higher you go, it's going to make more and more polys. Don't go higher than 7. You're going to probably crash Max. Just depends on your computer. Now that's a lot of geometry now, but keep in mind this is representing 20 kilometers. So if we're going to create a full-size terrain, that's actually not as much as it seems. Of course, when you zoom in, you can kind of see it. So now I'm going to hit F4 and hide that again, hit G to hide the grid. So with that set, we're going to use another modifier called Displace, and this is where our height map comes into play. So we're going to click on Displace here, and you're going to see a section under the Displace tool, or modifier, that says Bitmap, and right here says None. So we're going to click on None, and we're going to choose this. So I have it saved on my desktop. So we're going to go to Desktop here, and here is that merged height map that I was talking about. So we're going to hit Open. Now, by default, nothing's going to happen because we actually haven't given any height. So right here, you see where it says strength. I'm going to rotate this so you can see it as it pops up. But we're going to start increasing the strength. And just look how quickly we can get the geometry right here to look like real life mountains and so on. It's pretty crazy how awesome this tool is. But that's the obviously the quickest way to create terrain. We can just use real world stuff, leave it as is, call it a day. But I want to quickly talk about some of the other options that you can create. And so one of them in Max, so before I go back to Photoshop and talk about what you can do in Photoshop, one of the tools that you can use in Max, you see right here where it says map instead of bitmap, I can remove the bitmap here. So we can remove this one, this displacement map that we already created, our height map. And we click on None for here to open up this box. Now this is basically creating procedurally generated terrain. Now the two best ones I found to use is noise. So if you want to use noise, you can, and smoke. Now I'm only going to show noise for time's sake, but you can go play around with smoke and see what kind of effects you can get with that also. So I'm going to click on noise. And you see right off the bat, it's going to create kind of all this nonsense. Now, there's a little bit more control we can do than what we're seeing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit M. Now I'm going to bring up the material editor with the M key. And we're going to come over here, and we're going to drag the map from this into the material editor and let go. It's going to ask if you want to make an instance or a copy. We're going to keep an instance so that whatever I change here changes this. So we're going to hit OK. And then I'm going to double click to get the settings. Now, the settings here allows us to change what's going on. We can choose our noise type from regular to the more detailed fractal to even more detailed turbulence. Now, we can play around with these different settings down here to change stuff. I'm going to go back to regular, and you can see the first thing you can do is change the size. So if we want them to be more kind of rolling hills or whatever, we can increase the size here, and then we have a little less of them. So this just gives us some kind of generic rolling hills, or maybe like a sandy kind of desert landscape, right? Pretty simply, without actually getting a real desert. And then you can play around with the highs and the lows. So what I like to do is play around the lows here. What you can do with the lows is if you increase the lows, you'll see what happens here. It actually actually drops that down. But what this does is it creates these areas that become flat. And this works really well if you're talking about video game terrain, because in this case, you have the player have more areas that are a little bit flat. You can always go in and just vary them just a little bit. But this does create kind of a cool effect. Now you can keep the same settings and then even change it to fractal and see how that goes. And now we're getting a little bit more kind of mountainous areas and all kinds of stuff like that. And then we can continue to change the size and all that and get all sorts of effects. We also can, of course, change the strength here and make the mountains kind of sharper or much lower and so on, so they're a little bit more subtle. So there's a lot of stuff you can do just by kind of playing around with the procedural stuff here in Max. So as I said before, the last way of creating a height map I want to show you is in Photoshop. And as I mentioned before, it's just a black and white image. So if we understand how that works, I can, go over here, click on Photoshop. I've already got a 1024 by 1024 pixel image started here. We want to make sure that our colors are black and white. If they're not, you can just click this little button right here in Photoshop and it'll automatically make them black and white. Now the reason why I want to do that is because we can come up to the top here, go to Filter, and then we can choose Render, and we can choose Clouds, and this will give us a basic kind of start here. So you'll see that we get some sort of like valleys right here and some sort of mountains right here and so on. Now, if you actually go up to the top, I don't know if you know this hotkey, but Alt-Control-F will do the last filter that you used. So in this case, it's Cloud. So if I hit Alt, Control, and then F, and I just kept pressing it, you'll see I'll get different variations. So I can keep doing this until I get something that I like. Now you can also use difference clouds, which gives you a different effect. So if I go to Filter, Render, and then choose difference clouds, we can get this, which is kind of like a little bit of the opposite, but it creates more of these like river types and so on. Now, of course, from here, you can adjust this stuff. So you can get some random thing. I mean, you could paint it all from scratch, right? Just grab a paintbrush and start painting in white. What I prefer to do is actually make the background all black and then paint up using a brush where I want mountains, right? I think it makes more sense in my mind to work that way, but you can work either way. But this is kind of the idea here. And of course, we can always add adjustment layers. Things like, let's say we put on brightness and contrast, and we use legacy. So if we turn this on, you can increase it, and this way it will actually increase everything. Or the contrast, where we'll get much higher areas and much lower areas. So of course, you can play around with those adjustments, and that's brightness and contrast. And or also use, if you want, something like, let's see, where is levels? So this is levels right here. And so this kind of represents, in this, if you've never used the levels graph, this represents the pure black over here. This is your middle gray, and this is your pure white. So if you want more white in the scene, you can see we actually have no pure white in the scene. That's why there's no part of the graph. So we can move this over so that this first part becomes pure white. So we do have a little bit of pure white kind of right here and here. And then, of course, if we want to add more and more white, we can just keep pulling this in. So all of these colors, which used to be a range of different whites, are now turned pure white. And of course, you can do it the other way around, right? And we can go this way, and we can make more darker areas and so on. And then we can change the middle gray just the same. So what we can do if we want to kind of change the location of things and push things around a little bit and so on, we can go over here to the background layer. All right, and I'm going to unlock that so we can actually affect it. And we're going to go to Filter, and this time we're going to choose Liquify. Okay, so this thing will pop up. Let me, it's moving over my screen here, so I'm going to kind of center it so you can see a little bit better. And so we can use some of these tools over here, right? So we have things like the forward warp tool. So if we click on that, and depending on the size of the brush, obviously you can use the bracket keys to change it. We can start pushing things around a little bit. So if you want to kind of move your terrain around a little bit, you can do that. You can use this, which is the pucker tool, which will smush things in a little bit. So we can kind of shrink areas in. And then, of course, the quite opposite, which would be the bloat tool here. We can do the same thing like that and bloat it out. Okay, so obviously you'll just hit OK. I'm just going to cancel this, but that would be how you can make manipulations through that. You can use tools over here, such as, in this particular case, dodge and burn. So burn tool will actually darken areas. So if we want to lower a certain area, I don't want this to be so high, but only this area, not affect the whole thing using levels and things like that, we can just come in and I can start darkening that area up with the burn tool. And of course, you can do the quite opposite with the dodge tool. Come in, I want to lighten this up even more. We can do that and accentuate it. Of course, you can choose different brushes so that it doesn't come in as a circle. Make sure that it's a soft brush, all sorts of stuff. And you have other tools such as the smudge tool, which is basically like Liquify, but it's a little bit more destructive. If you kind of come in here, you can do the same thing. You see how it kind of blurs it though, which can kind of give a weird effect, but you can move around little things just slightly using the smudge tool instead of Liquify. And then of course, we can also do things like the blur tool. So if we want to kind of get rid of some detail, there's just too much nuance over here, we can start blurring it or whatever, or we can just straight up blur the whole thing. So if we're like, this is just too much detail in this map, I kind of like where these rivers and some of the stuff are, but there's just too much little granular difference between everything. We can go to Filter, we can choose Blur, we can do a Gaussian blur, and then we can increase the amount of it, and you can see that. And then what this will do is it will create kind of a more, like I said, a more smooth effect as opposed to all the little bit of grain that we're getting. But obviously, that's just a lot of different things. These are not the only ways you can manipulate it, but you're more than welcome to also just grab a paintbrush and literally just, if I want this nice deep valley, I can just literally paint it in right there. And this is going to be perfectly flat. Any area that I paint as pure black will be perfectly flat. I can even like follow some of these existing lines and so on. So you can actually create an entire map this way and control it using all of these different methods. So if I want to say save this out, of course, we can go up to the top and go File. We can go Save As. In this case, I can save it as I'm going to do a Targa. Or actually a PNG in this case. We'll pick PNG. And we can name it whatever we want, blah, 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 blah again, and then just hit Save. And I'm just going to hit OK. So now you'll see that if I actually go back into Max and I get rid of this map here, and we go back to Bitmap, Desktop, you can see I can now use this one, and then we get this kind of effect, which is pretty interesting also. So you see where I painted black, I have that flat area. You can really control a lot of this. And this really isn't the extent of it. Obviously, keep in mind that you can still use any tools in Max to further manipulate it. So your height map can start it, and then from there, you can do more manipulation. So let me quickly show you that before I wrap up the video. So the first thing you want to do is once you get to the point where you like your terrain as is using a height map and so on, we don't want to fiddle around with it anymore, we can then collapse it. So I'm going to right click and convert it to an editable poly because some of the tools I want to use are under the poly tools. So we'll convert to editable poly. Now, of course, you can always model it by, say, grabbing, vertices and stuff like that, and then using soft selection. So if we turn on soft selection here and increase the value of the fall off, so it affects more area. Say, grab the move tool, rotate tool, or anything like that. We can slowly kind of lift or depress areas pretty simply. So if you want to make our mountains a little bit more dramatic, of course, if you never used soft select, remember the things that are selected directly, the red vertices are the most affected, orange a little less, and so on and so forth as you go down the color spectrum. You can control that, of course, by doing this. If there's no soft selection, then we literally just grab that whole thing and lift it up like that, which is obviously a little silly. So soft selection is an option, but then there's another tool. So if I get out of vertices here, and of course we got to make sure that we flatten our stack and we're editable poly for this to work. But if we scroll down to the bottom, there's this paint deformation set of tools, okay, and you can turn that on. So if we click on the push and pull, you'll see that we get a little brush here. Now I can increase the size of my brush by going right here. You'll see the brush gets bigger, and then if I left click, and depending on how much my push and pull and my brush strength value is, I can kind of lift up the terrain. So this is kind of how it works when you're in a terrain editor. So if you're in a terrain editor within like Unity or Unreal, this is kind of what they have. They have like these little tools that let you paint stuff. Now, if it's painting too high, too fast, you can kind of come down here and drop both the value. And I tend to like dropping both values way down. So both brush strength and push and pull. And then you'll get like little tiny kind of hills building up. Maybe I did just a little too much, right? Because I got to keep clicking. But this allows you to do a little bit of minor changes. Of course, we can always increase it a little bit more and go back to our brush strength, and now it paints up not as much as this before, but we have a little bit more control as we can paint up areas. Or if you hold down Alt, you can paint down. So you can see it actually depress the area by holding down Alt. So just your normal left click will paint up, and holding down Alt will paint down. Now you can also relax, and what relax does is, let's just say we create too much of a spiky thing. So let me go back to pull here, and we have too much variance between some of these areas. I want to kind of lower it a little bit, but kind of keep the general form. We can grab relax. I can increase the brush size. It's more effective when you have a larger area to select from. And then we can kind of come down and we can paint now because my values are still low. It keeps the same brush strength from the previous tool, which is kind of annoying. I can lift up the strength and then paint over it, and you'll see it'll start flattening it down a little bit. So if it's really bumpy like these areas here, you can see I'm softening them up quite a bit, right? It's very subtle, but it just depends on your geometry. If your geometry is really spiky, maybe I come down here, you can see it a little bit better, right? See how quickly it softens it up? So that's your relax tool. You can even control how the fall off on the brush is. If you click on brush options, you can fiddle around with the little dope sheet here and all the other stuff. And I'm not going to get into it, but I'm just introducing you to the tool so you know it exists, and you kind of play around with it. So those are a lot of different ways that you can create terrain using 3D Studio Max, Photoshop, and then like height map generators off the internet. In fact, if you even want to take this terrain and say bring it into a game engine. Maybe it's just too many polys. If I hit 7 right here to bring up our poly count, you can kind of see that our poly count right now is about 262,000, which for terrain is really actually not that bad, especially if we want to make it 20 kilometers long. But we can use, if I actually create another modifier, put another modifier on here, which is called, let me find here, ProOptimizer. So ProOptimizer, now if you don't like triangles, you'll hate ProOptimizer because it creates tons of triangles. But notice right now, and actually now that I've added I don't know why that happened, why I went from 200, but right now it's saying that I've got 524,000 polys. So what I'm going to do with ProOptimizer, I'm going to hit calculate once I've added it, and it's going to calculate all of the polys, all the vertices on the mesh. So now we set it to 100. Now if I want to take, how many percentage of the vertices do I want to take away? Let's go all the way down to 20% of everything that's there. So if I type in 20 and hit enter, you'll actually notice there are going to be some smoothing group issues, right? We can go in there and obviously clean up smoothing by using a smooth modifier or whatever. But notice how many polys are now in the scene. There's only 104,000 polys. Now, if I hit F4 to see, this is what's going on. You'll actually see, and this is why I say if you don't like tries, then you're going to be really upset about this. But in areas where it's fairly flat like this, it's going to have a lot less. When there's a lot of detail, because there's a lot of bumpiness and actually some real deformation to the geometry, it's going to have more polys. You can kind of see how that works, but it does its best to get rid of as many polys as possible. And you can continue to go down until you get something you like. And then if you want to make this literally 1-to-1 size, once you are finished, so remember, I picked a 20-kilometer distance for my initial height map. So if we're saying this is going to be the same thing, I know we're not using that height map anymore, but let's just say we were, and I wanted to get it to 1-to-1 scale. Remember, we did 20 meters, and there's 1,000 meters in a kilometer. So 20 times 1,000, we'd have to do 20,000 meters. But in order to do that, we can just grab the scale tool, and then down here it says it's 100%. Well, if we add this, so 100% represents the 20, we just add up 3 zeros to the end of it and hit enter. This would then be your 20 kilometers. But you get the idea. At this point, you can import it into a game engine and it will literally be 1-to-1 size. So either way, hopefully this content helps you guys understand a little bit about creating terrain and different 3D programs. Of course, you can do this in another program like Blender or Maya. It really doesn't matter. In other videos, I'm actually going to show how you can take the height maps that you use in here and bring them directly into something like Unity. So, kind of stay tuned for that. But either way, just kind of a quick video, kind of one-off as a supplement for my class. But I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch the video. So once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.